Hey, happy Halloween, everybody! How's it going this Saturday? Evening Rage, afternoon Pseudo, guess it's afternoon. Hey, Snow, hey, Raven, who else did I see in there? Hey, Pookie, thanks for the Facebook.
You're so intense. The intensity is so high.
So spooky.
We're talking about spoopy games. I missed the Y. There we go, there's the mistake. Everything else went too well. Everything else went too well.
Just the one spoop, actually.
Yeah, spoop game design. You're gonna walk in and it's gonna be like, blah! And then the game's over.
No, you're getting trick-or-treaters already?
Oh, wow.
I suppose time zones are a thing.
Yeah, it'd be 7 p.m. over there. I'm surprised people are out, but actually, I'm probably not that surprised. So on to spoopy game design, because that's a much better topic.
Spoop games.
Spoopy. Let's start by just getting the list. People's favorite spoopy games. What's everyone's favorite?
RE7.
Resident Evil 7. Deus is corrected at 7 p.m. here. Excited to hear about spooky games. Spoopy. Spoopy.
Job Simulator's terrifying. But actually, Alien Isolation and Obscure are probably some of my favorites.
I didn't play that one. Upscare?
Obscure.
Obscure.
Yeah, it was, I think, originally in the PS2 and GameCube.
Little Nightmares. Hide and Shriek. I'm a huge fan of Dead Space 1 and 2.
Yeah, Dead Space 1 and 2 are fantastic.
Love those games. It's so good.
Maybe not like the spoopiest game, but I also loved the like super campy action. Oh my, that's so noisy. The super campy action Resident Evils, like 4 and 5, whichever those were, also pretty great.
They were. I really enjoyed 4, and it definitely had some horror moments into it. That's something I'd like to kind of go over and talk about a bit later too. Is the action games with horror elements, because there are quite a few games that kind of get labeled as horror, but kind of verge more on the action side, and maybe look into like what's the difference and what's that line that gets drawn between those.
Yeah, for sure. Like Dead Space, I think, is another really good example of a game that sort of rides that line, especially the second one, because you've got such a focus on the combat, but it's definitely a spooky game. There's no denying that game is spooky.
It's extremely spooky, and then the third one happens.
Yeah, then the third one happens.
Spooky for different reasons.
The other games worse in retrospect.
It becomes terrifying in its own way.
Outcast? Do you mean Outlast?
I'm back.
Yes, you do mean Outlast. Yeah, Outlast is another one that's beloved by many.
I enjoyed it. It got a little instructed to fix my goddamn hair.
One of the first ones I played would have been Fear. Way back in like
Fear was an interesting one for me. Let's put Doom 3 on the list too. I love it for all sorts of bad reasons. Fear is an interesting one.
Scared me more than anything.
Oh yeah, that was a spooky game. Fear is an interesting one because on first play it messes with your head. Like it's a scary game, and then you go back and play it again and actually think about the game mechanics, and you're actually like unkillable.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I like that idea.
What's another good one? Soma. Really like Soma. That's a very spooky game. Asks a lot of spooky questions.
Silent Hill is a good series.
Oh yes, I really like Silent Hill. I didn't like the game itself. I hated the game as a game. But really cool case study for game design.
Yeah, for sure. Alan Wake, yeah, I know a lot of people who enjoyed Alan Wake. I did not. It's not one of the games that I enjoyed.
Did you like it, Snow? If so, why? So that's the next question. We've got a decent list here. This is enough to work off of. There's a nice range of different styles, but there's some definite commonalities between everything. All right, so let's massage our data set a little bit here and take a look at what we've got. Why do people? So Resident Evil 7, we can speak to this one on why we liked it. Why did we like it?
The atmosphere that was built by a combination of the music, the art direction, and the shader work.
Yes. Let's start a little list down here. Things essential to proper spooky game. Lighting. One of the most important things.
Audio design, also very, very important to making a game spoopy.
For our top level, there's kind of like three elements that we can categorize a lot of the stuff we're going to put into, and it's immersion, tension, and punishment. Is kind of what that boils down to, and it's kind of pulled from how horror movies are kind of designed. Their narratives draw you in and make you care. They give you tension to give you that thrill, and then there's punishment, which is what are we afraid of and what happens and what are we trying to avoid.
Punishment, tension, and what's the other one?
Immersion.
Is that correct? I don't think it is. This doesn't do spell check.
That looks
That is definitely correct.
Shit.
My spell check's not been working sometimes either, and it's just like, I did not notice how much I relied on that.
Yeah, I've always had terrible spelling, but schooling wasn't great for warriors in the ancient times.
Oh, the fact that you're literate at all is amazing. Truly a scholar among warriors.
Yep, that's what they call me, the scholar warrior.
Yeah, so some of the things, so like lighting, that can go into tension. The flickering lights is kind of on the par of the uncanny valley, and darkness. It's something that as humans we're not used to, and we're kind of been during our evolution. We can't see in the dark. We don't know what's in the dark. Therefore, we should probably be scared of the dark because there's something in there that could probably eat us.
Yeah, and the quality of that lighting is also very important. Poor lighting effects can definitely kill a horror game.
Yeah, and
that affects this one.
It does help with immersion as well.
Yeah, the immersion. The lighting is pretty much everything for immersion in games. That's kind of what we've been learning. Proper lighting is one of the number one things that our brain is looking at for realism. It really puts you into the scene a lot more when every cast light is in the right spot. It looks real.
An important distinction too for immersion, it's not always just like graphic fidelity. You can have unrealistic graphics, but the key is consistency. If your art style is consistent, you will not the player will not be aware of it too much. They will get used to it and they can still be immersed in it. And this can be shown from classic horror games that were still terrifying, but nowadays they kind of look like hot garbage. They were still believable. It doesn't have to be critical as long as you're consistent. It's when you start kind of having inconsistent styling, and it usually happens, of course, when we bring up lighting, because lighting was hard to do and everything looks kind of fine, and all of a sudden you get this jarring effect from the lighting and that breaks your immersion. But you can be immersed in from just text, like horror novels can immerse you, and there's no graphics in that, it's just text. Or even though there's a lot of 2D spooky games, and those games don't even have 3D graphics, it's just 2D sprites running around, and they still can have that horror effect as long as it's consistent and you're immersed and you kind of care about what's going on.
Although I will say a lot of the modern 2D spooky games do use some fairly complex lighting systems, which really helps as far as the immersion goes.
Oh yeah, Lakeview Cabin 2 just went into early access, and I absolutely love the first one, so I picked it up to kind of get an idea of what they're going on, because I would love to be able to provide feedback to that developer, and they have instituted a whole lot of lighting, and it just looks so good. It looks so good. It does help so much.
Excellent.
And if you're familiar with Gloomwood at all, it's not pixel art per se, but it is a 2D spooky game.
Yep.
And the tension and immersion that you get from the lighting in that game is fantastic.
Yeah, that's from a baser level. One of the key things I'm looking for when I'm playing a horror game, I should catch myself not breathing.
Gotta get that tension up.
Yeah, there should definitely be times where I'm just like, what's coming? And then I'm like, oh yeah, breathe, I'm playing a game. My life isn't actually in threat, even if I die in the game. I'm okay. I don't need to have fight or flight jacked up to 11 right now. Let's play this game. That doesn't happen often. And I don't know about you guys, but the punishment, the danger factor, is definitely massively key to it.
This is what separates it typically from an action game. Because in an action game, if you're playing like Call of Duty, is a war game. Like let's say one of the original ones, you're at D-Day, which is one of the most a pretty horrific battle. Realistically, if you were to experience that, it'd probably be the most horrifying moment of your life. You would be absolutely goddamn terrified. But there's no punishment through a video game. Video games are what allow us to have these experiences while being in the safety of our home. And that's a really big distinction between horror games, because it's the same thing. Well, why do I really care if I die, right? Or maybe something will suddenly happen and can spook me. But true horror is, you have something at stake. There are real stakes, and you have, an invested, like reason to not die or not have the fail condition happen.
Yep.
Which can be very difficult to do.
It is
extremely difficult.
It is difficult to do, and that's kind of why we want to look at it, what was done well and what wasn't, because picking it out of the list, Outlast did not do it well at all.
Yeah, so most of these games kind of are more action games with horror elements.
Yeah.
Which is, it's not a bad thing. Those are typically more fun. Like true horror games are kind of still a niche industry because they're not always too fun. Same with kind of like true horror movies. It's not really something like I'm gonna go and watch this movie to have fun. It's more about I want to have a kind of unique experience and put myself in a thing that I would never really experience unless I did this. Resident Evil 7's good. Obscure was actually really good at that. For people who don't know what that game is, you basically play as a bunch of, I think, either college or high school students, and just really strange creatures and monsters are coming about. And you start off with an initial group of like 6 or 7, and you pick which one you want to play as. It's also split screen co-op, so anyone who likes co-op games, this game is fantastic, and I've beat it a few times. But when you die, your character's gone. They get killed, they get taken, and that's it. So you only have a certain amount of characters. Certain characters can only do certain things as well. So there's a real, a real punishment. Like if you die, that character is gone, and that's it. So like when you get into those tense situations of monsters coming, it is terrifying. Like I don't want this person to die. You start getting, especially with games with narrative, you get kind of attached to them, and you don't want to lose them. And you know that if you fail, they're actually going to go, rather than oh, I died, I have to restart the level. And the first time it's scary, but the common thing we'll see as well is replayability. If you have to redo the same thing again, it's not going to be as scary the second time.
I think that's something that is able to be avoided by not being a traditional game, like not having a simple fail state that you can get yourself into. And games like Soma and Until Dawn, they technically have fail states, but it's not really a fail state. Like you can continue, and it gives a sense of consequence to these actions, and you continue forward with the consequence of, whatever that bad thing that happened, it happened. Now you have to deal with that. And it's something that sort of moves them away from a traditional game design. And if most of what you're doing is walking around and listening to things, and there's not really a fail state, then is it a game? But the way to avoid the feeling of like, oh yeah, I've seen this death animation already, I know exactly what's going to happen here, I had to reload a checkpoint, can really take you out of your immersion.
I like that idea, Snow. Just sorry to that sounds like you were almost at the end of a point there, but it'd be cool if when you died that the level changed when you respawn, so the punishment is now you need to relearn where everything is.
Roguelikes are like a great genre for horror to be in.
Yeah,
there are a few. There are a few that kind of tap into that, but I don't think anything's done it like super well. But that's a really good mechanic. You get your run, you die, and that's it. But I mean, depending on how brutal that punishment is and how terrifying it is, it needs to be kind of a balance. Because if it's too punishing, then there's not really a point. The player will die once and say, "Well, I'm not going to put myself through that again."
Yeah, I agree. That's why I really like Resident Evil 7. It manages to have a lot of those moments, even though you're playing a game. And like I said, it's the lighting, for one. But also, they have a very keen sense of phobia throughout the game.
Oh, fuck the bugs.
Something we noticed. They paid close attention to phobias and the most common phobias throughout the game, and they nailed pretty much all of them.
Yeah, they hit quite a few of the major phobias. Bugs obviously gets me. They've got tryptophobia in there. They've got heights. They've got dark. They've got this sense of paranoia that everything's out to kill you.
Yeah,
it's really good. Good game.
Yeah,
do you want to put that under tension, saying playing on people's phobias?
Yep. Do we want to start maybe putting game design elements under these? Is that what you're saying?
Kind of like just like elements that you can use under these, so like tensions, because these are the three game design elements you're going to want to put in a horror game. Is you need your immersion, you need your tension, and you need your punishment. It doesn't have to be an exact formula, but that's something I've noticed that most horror games will have, is with these three things, and it's the same thing that goes into movies. And then
okay, we've got lighting. Hey, Skull Trooper, welcome. Enjoy your lurk, and you're right, Doom is a great game. So we've got lighting under tension and immersion. So lighting is basically important to horror.
Darkness is spoopy.
Oh.
Punishment is usually, death or, just a failure in general. But there's other things such as Rage was saying, there's consequences, consequences that you have to continue with. You can't redo them. So, it's, kind of like a committal, the words are hard right now, but
committal is
examples
correct.
Or I guess an immutable consequence.
Immutable, yeah. There's a good word.
So like I guess like obscure, they have permanent character death. Pathologic's another good example. These people are, if you're not doing well, these people are actually dying. It's kind of up to the player though to how much they actually care. And then there's other games that not necessarily have you die, but they have the player will have an outcome or a goal in mind that they want to reach. But these consequences either make that harder or make it that it's going to be impossible to get that, and they're going to have to change their goals at the end, right? So an example again kind of is like similar like to Dead Rising. How many people do you want to save? Which people do you want to save? You're never really scared for yourself because when you die, you reset. But when these other characters die, that's it for them. So like their well-being, that's where a lot of horror and that tension builds up. It's like, am I going to be able to, get these people out of here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the idea of the Iron Man style progression for horror. Auto saves constantly. You can't undo actions. You can't make your own saves. It just sort of, the game moves forward and you are where you are. And if you don't like what's happened, bad.
Yeah, it is terrifying to have to live with your actions and consequences. It's another thing why a lot of horror games aren't for people, or for kind of a niche crowd.
There's a lot of social commentary to unpack in that statement.
That's not for this show, though.
Yeah, but it's a thing. A lot of people play video games to be able to get away from actions and consequences. You can kind of a lot of the times there's sandbox games you can do whatever you want, right? But horror traditionally will throw this stuff in your face and kind of make you uncomfortable on purpose. And it's a big part of it too is making sure the player is uncomfortable, uneasy, as well as making sure your game is unpredictable, especially through the mid to late games, because you'll find a lot of horror games fall off midway through. That's because humans are very good at pattern recognition and very good at getting accustomed to new environments and new systems. So if you don't change it up enough, we'll get used to it, and it's no longer, as uncertain, as unpredictable, and as scary.
Silent Hill's on there. Hey, Helen God. Welcome.
Welcome.
Silent Hill. Go ahead.
There's one more thing that I called out specifically under RE7 that I think is very, very important for both immersion and tension, which is the music and audio design.
Yeah.
You'll note all of these games have fantastic audio.
And for tension,
well, there's something fun we can talk about before we go from music.
Yeah, I was going to say lack of music is also good for tension,
Okay.
the absence of sound.
Yeah, that's definitely a way you can go. But what you'll see a lot doing, this is an old trick that has been used time and time again since the days of live theater or video screen. And it works. And they actually accidentally killed people with it by using it incorrectly. Tale that deserves to be told. So you know not to do that either. If you play music at the beat of the average human heart, the human heart will begin to synchronize with that beat. And if you slowly increase that beat as the tension in the whatever the person is experiencing increases, their heart will go up with that music. And you'll be able to control their experience to an extent by increasing the pace of this music. Do not, however, make the pace of the music get too fast.
That can actually kill people.
Yeah, there was a case in a live play where multiple people went into cardiac arrest due to the music and the tension in the show. And found that they were actually just following the beat of the music with their heart. Old and couldn't handle it. Still pissed about the Kojima Silent Hill. That one was going in the right direction. You mean towards the movies?
No, PT was. I was so hyped for that. And I actually have a friend who still has PT on their PS4, which was like, that's what Norman Reedus was in originally when we found out he was working with all that fun stuff. And then we got Death Stranding.
Yeah. PT is a hard one. It hits a lot of like really emotionally involved notes as far as horror goes. I know a lot of people who just couldn't deal with it. They couldn't do it. It's
fucked. It was horror-wise, it is horrifying. And now no one can play it unless you happen to download it when it was up before it got pulled.
Interesting. Know about this. I'm gonna have to look into it more.
PS4s with PT installed on them go for quite a bit of money.
I'd imagine. It was legit frightening.
It was real good. I played it quite a bit with my friends because we're all pretty much we're really into horror movies and horror games, and that one stands out by a lot. And it was a teaser. That's what what PT was. It was like it was just a teaser. And
it was literally a playable teaser for the game that they were making.
Is its name literally just PT?
Yeah, it's playable teaser. It was rumored to be for the news for Silent Hill, and then that they kind of had that falling out and it got scrapped. But my God, the potential that game had was insane.
That is a shame. That is a shame.
I believe it was called Silent Hills, the game that they were making, as in multiple hills.
I wasn't paying attention to gaming at that time. I'd given up on it. I had given up on new games because I hadn't found FromSoft, and I was like, new games suck. I basically just played MMOs, and there was no good MMOs happening at that time, so I wasn't playing a lot of games. And yeah, Rage. Rage made me play Bloodborne. Here I am. I'm back.
Turns out Bloodborne's a good game.
Yeah. Yep. My favorite game was still from SNES era. Like, my top 5 were all from, like, SNES era. And I was like, I haven't played anything that I really like in ages. Maybe I just don't like games anymore. No, I do. Turns out I do.
Turns out there's just a lot of crap out there.
Yes, there is. We had a bad era for people who like difficult games with meaning.
I'm going to say there's lots of difficult games, but they just don't have any meaning. PS2 is filled with difficult games with no meaning.
I don't like difficult for no reason.
For all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Now, Alien vs. Predator is one that the only one I didn't finish because we were just too scared to play it, basically. Granted, I was a little younger, but I've never been the type to be easly scared. Like, I've always been the horror kind.
I've been so tempted to request Alien Isolation because that does that to a T. It is fantastic. It is very spooky. One of the spookiest games that I've played.
I did want to talk about Alien Isolation in particular. And Alien vs. Predator doesn't have a lot to talk about other than it was difficult. Like, there aren't a lot of enemies in it. Hey, Rubido. But the enemy is so difficult and dangerous and fast that you're always on your guard. Because if you're not on your guard for a second, it'll jump through the fucking roof and kill you. Literally.
Immediately.
Just like come right through the roof. You're dead.
The tension that the radar builds up is insane and unparalleled to most games that I've played.
Yep.
Just that ominous beep.
Yep.
Beep.
But the thing is, in Alien vs. Predator, it wasn't an enemy radar. It was a motion detector. So it picked up swinging cables.
Yeah, false positives are terrifying.
And if you don't catch it as it comes through the wall or whatever, you're dead. So here's how the game plays, okay? You're walking along, and a cable somewhere goes beep on your radar, and you go. And you do that for like 10 minutes.
Accurate. This is an accurate summation of how that game is played.
Until you're sure that nothing's coming through a wall. And then you take 5 steps and something jumps through the wall and kills you.
There was no stopping it. You just died a lot.
But Alien Isolation is really closer to Outlast. Because you don't have a weapon. AVP, you were a Marine. You still had a gun.
You have weapons. You just can't kill the main alien. But there's lots of other stuff going on that can kill you that you can't fight back against.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's got that same element of you can hide in the locker from the main alien, but that AI. Fun fact about Alien Isolation: there are actually 2 AIs controlling the main big bad, and they kind of work together and work against each other to really kind of give it that authentic. What the hell is this thing thinking? Because, it doesn't always know what the hell it's thinking either. And it's just so unpredictable. And the one thing that stands out for Outlast, which is, something we'll talk about, is kind of the keeping the the predictability. Like Outlast, eventually, you'll figure out that if you hide in a locker, you're safe. Like, as long as it doesn't actually see you go in there. And every single time, or almost every single time, the thing chasing you will always walk up, stand in front of your locker, and then just go open the one beside you, which is absolutely terrifying. The first 2 times,
yeah,
and then that's it. Alien Isolation. Sometimes it just opens your locker, just beamlines it for it. Sometimes it doesn't. You don't know when it's going to do it or not. You're not guaranteed to be safe whenever. You could have been hiding there the whole time, and it kind of just sniffs you out, and that is terrifying. It's frustrating, but terrifying.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. Is the excessive predictability in Outlast. Like, Outlast really is scary for a level or 2. And then after that, it's scary until you find a locker after that.
And then there's things I've found when I was playing it, like they can't grab you when you're transitioning or jumping over an obstacle.
Yep.
So you could kind of just run up to something, jump over it, wait for them to jump over it, jump back over it, and kind of and juke them out. And then overall, then once you kind of figure that stuff, it's kind of, you know, you're done. And another big thing that we'll need to put for both immersion and tension is AI. And one of the reasons why horror games are quite rare is because they need impeccable AI.
Yes.
You need to have unpredictable AI, which is just something that's incredibly, incredibly difficult to do.
Becoming more easy, but
I don't think it's it's at a purely design level. You can have like you could have a player controlling the monster, which is how it happens in, you know, Friday the 13th and the Dead by Daylight series. But they're still predictable. You can still predict, you know, what people are going to do once they do it a couple times. They have those patterns. So you need like almost randomness, but like a whole natural AI that, you know, isn't too far gone. It's always going to be something fairly complicated until we find some sort of formula. But if we found a formula, then it becomes predictable. So let's
just get it clear. I'm not saying it's easy.
Yeah,
I'm just saying it's easier than it was.
It is less difficult.
Yes. That's
from an implementation perspective.
Yeah, and it's going to continue getting easier, and I look forward to our super AI era horror games, because that does sound really interesting.
They just discover all your phobias and then just use them against you immediately. There's a game that there's a few games that have had kind of like neural net or genetic algorithms for horror, and I think Hello Neighbor was one of them. Hello Neighbor, which I've played and beaten it, and I have I can talk a bit about it in a bit. But that AI, the premise of the game is you're trying to basically break into your neighbor's house and figure out what's going on there because there's some sketchy shit happening.
Yep.
And then he kind of just goes around the house and will catch you or stop you, and you're trying different methods. And what they were boasting, not really boasting, but what they were claiming when they're releasing the game is that, you know, it'll adapt to your play style. So let's say if you're like really reliant on sneaking, you know, he'll grow to know how to like draw you out or catch you. Or if you're setting traps, he'll learn how to avoid traps. Or it was supposed to respond to how you were. But then what it kind of ended up doing is becoming kind of predictable and like, oh, if I do this enough times, you know, it'll lessen this side of him. So then I can switch back and then exploit that kind of thing. Which was okay. Overall, the AI just wasn't fantastic in that game either, which really kind of sucked because it was really good. And then I kind of figured out that you can get them stuck. And the moment you can get the big bad thing stuck in a corner and you just get free reign, the horror, at least in the game, is just over.
Yep.
And it was kind of funny. Like I felt bad doing it, but at the same time, it's like I can't help myself, right? It's like
I know how to do it now. I gotta do it.
Yeah, it's like, why would I at this point? Like I'm just artificially making the game harder for myself because, you know, I'm trying to play it the real way, but just knowing of the possibility has already ruined that immersion.
I feel you. Definitely.
And that's.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's something that makes spooky games so difficult at its core, is that it is so easy to break immersion in a video game.
Absolutely.
Because it's a video game. It's not even close to reality. You're trying to manipulate a world through button presses on a controller of some form, and like taking that and making sure that all of the different engine bugs that can happen in a game, all of the different logic bugs that can happen in a game, all of the different state transition bugs that can happen in a game don't happen to keep the experience consistent and immersive. That's hard. That's really, 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 really hard.
And on top of that, you can't control what the player is doing. Like let's say if it's a PC game, you know, they're going to be getting Steam notifications, they're going to be getting text messages, they're going to have external things that, you know, will also break immersion and that are outside of the game's control entirely. So it's a really difficult medium. I'm very excited for VR horror games. I've played a few that are pretty good. But currently with the same issue with most VR games is locomotion's not quite there. And that can, depending on the game, that can immediately break your immersion if, you know, you can't walk around too far and you get like that invisible wall effect and you have to either teleport. But there's a few games that do it quite well, which are like, you know, escape rooms in virtual reality are quite well done because they can do things that, you know, physical escape rooms can't do, which is, you know, actually put a monster that will like fuck you up there. or like, you know, start flooding the room or start doing things that, you know, like I'm really excited for that meeting because I find that like for immersion level, nothing really beats VR. You're just fully encapsulated. You're basically cut out or cut off from, you know, the outside world, especially if you're wearing like, you know, noise canceling headphones. Nothing's really going to bug you.
Yeah, that's exactly how I do it too.
Gonna get spooked.
Yep. I loved Arizona Sunshine's cave segment. Or the, you know, in the mine.
Yeah.
That was great.
The Forest has a VR mode, and that game has very, very, very well done caves. And it's also one of my favorite games. I had a coworker play it in VR, and he was freaking out of it.
Nice.
It was kind of funny because like the premise of the game is you're in a plane that crashes on basically an island inhabited by cannibals. And my friend didn't really think about it, and he went into this camp that he found and just like set up a fire and was sitting in a hut. And then it got dark, and then it clued in his head like, oh, there's going to be people here. They're going to come back at night to sleep. And then he's sitting there while all these like grotesque, like deformed mutants are crawling at him, trying to get at him. And he's hiding behind this fire because like they're spooked by fire, and he's freaking out like, what have I done? What have I done? Why have I done this? And it's another thing I like to transition to talk about is one thing you want to do in horror games is flip the affordance that games have provided on the player. Games, I know people don't realize that you get used to certain things. Things mean certain things in the game, and you don't. They're subconscious at that level, and you want to flip those around. You want to just keep it unpredictable. Well, usually, you know, I can do this in a game. I was like, well, no longer you can't. Now this is a bad thing.
They get used to fire and will no longer be scared.
That's kind of terrifying.
That game is fantastic. I love it, and the caves are so well done, and it's multiplayer. I think it's multiplayer to up to 8 people, and I beat it with like 7. And it's just if anyone's seen the movie The Descent, you're basically just playing The Descent. You're just cave spelunking with a bunch of like scary as like cannibals and mutants using flares and like torches to navigate around in the dark.
Sons of the Forest is the second game.
I'm so stoked for it. It's actually made in Vancouver, which is extremely hype.
Oh, really?
I'm excited. Yeah, it is.
The first
I'm
game
very stoked.
The first game's setting is an island off the coast of Vancouver Island, basically. That's the
it's
sort of
heavy
setting it is.
inspiration.
Yeah. Imagine there's a little island that looks just like BC, but with cannibals on them in the caves.
Interesting.
Yes. And there is a
Maybe I'll have
story.
to check
It
that
won't
out.
tell you what it is, but it exists. Yes. I'm interested in the second one as well. If Pseudo wants to do it on stream multiplayer, we can get a whole bunch of people in on that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'd even be down for the first one if you have no experience to it. It's great.
I have the experience of you showing it to me. That was it.
See, now that you've brought it up like this, I think I understand the appeal of the game more. But when I'm looking at and this is totally off topic, by the way, I'm looking at the Steam page for the Forest, and it's just like, oh, it's just another survival game. Like that's just not interesting. But the stories that I'm hearing now, you know, obviously make it sound like much more than that, and they could have done a much better job marketing this game. The Steam page is just uninspiring.
Yeah, it kind of suffered from early access. Well, not suffered, but it went early access before I think the story was fully fleshed out. So that's just kind of how it was originally presented, and it was kind of just left a bit at that.
Yeah, that's... Unfortunately, good game designers aren't necessarily good marketers. We can do a bit on that with some time too, where the crux of the entire thing is leave it to the professionals.
Yeah, there's something to be said for potentially listening to player feedback and then completely disregarding it.
Yep. Listen to what they're saying, just take it with a grain of salt because they're a bunch of kids or people playing a game and not a game designer. I think the thing that ruined World of Warcraft more than anything was them catering to all the people complaining. Simplified the game over and over and over again. Silent Hill series.
We're very off topic.
Yes, it is. Silent Hill series. Silent Hill series was brought up, and that one's a fun one to dig into as well. Unless you guys want to go more with the, we were talking about Isolation and Outlast comparison.
It's, I think it's probably better to talk about Silent Hill, but I have one more thing to say about games like Alien Isolation. The punishment in that game, that is a very close plane. The punishment in that game is done in such a way that while the tension leading up to the punishment is very, very well done, it's very difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen with the big bad. After you die a couple of times, you're just like, yeah, okay, I'm dead, whatever, reload the checkpoint. And that is a difficult problem to address in a video game, which is why I'm so intrigued by games that just avoid that entirely.
Such as
Soma. Like there's no real fail state in Soma.
So how do they work around it?
It's basically a walking sim.
It's just like a spooky walking sim?
Yep. There are points where you can die, but it just resets the room that you're in, and the death is a very, very temporary setback, and you're just like, oh yeah, I forgot he paths over the enemy paths over to this area at this time. I'll just avoid that and then go through it.
That
the horror that they apply.
Isolation is?
Yes and no. Because of the combat additions in Alien Isolation and the fact that there are enemies that you do have to kill, it ends with just like, yeah, okay, yeah, I died, I get it. I'm not scared anymore. Let me reload the checkpoint. I just want to go kill these guys. Or at least that was my experience of it. And I found that the Soma did a better job of avoiding that level of frustration.
So it's the frustration element is what you wanted to address.
The frustration and the fact that frustration will pull you out of the moment. Because now you go, yeah, it's a video game. Stupid video game.
Yeah.
You get aware of the fail state. You're no longer dying. You yourself is having to, going to have to replay it, which that frustration can, so there's kind of like the two stages of the horror element for at least Alien Isolation. There's the initial, oh shit, I'm going to die. Oh God, this thing is terrifying. And then that happens a few times. And then it goes into the, well, I just want to get this level done. And, oh, please don't kill me. I just want to get this level done. The second one isn't as scary as the first one because it's not as immersive. You're thinking of yourself like, I just want to get this thing done, and this thing keeps blocking me. It's still some tension because you're like, please just keep walking and don't find me. And it's still like at a horror level, it's still decent, but it's very hard to do that. And a big thing that boils down to for horror and between action horror and just typical horror games is kind of making sure that the encounters in the fail states aren't predictable. There's a lot of horror games that are like, it's kind of like the boss fight thing where you're going to have something happen. It's scary the first time. You're probably going to die. The second time is going to be bad. The way to avoid that, which Isolation does kind of, is to have that unpredictable. You don't know when that alien's going to show up and kind of mess you up. There are some parts where it is scripted, and then as soon as you die in a scripted part, it's no longer as terrifying as the unscripted.
Yep.
The Forest does this quite well for single player. In single player, if you die, you don't actually die. You get knocked out, and the cannibals take you into the caves and basically hoist you up on the roof, and you have to break out, and then you have to get out of the cave. And another mechanic that the Forest has, I'll talk about in a sec, but basically getting out of that cave when you don't really have anything is absolutely terrifying. So you don't want to die because you don't want to deal with that. And number two is that there's a kind of a hidden time limit in the Forest. The more days that pass, the stronger the enemies get, and more bigger and scarier enemies start showing up. So you're kind of like, I want to, get my stuff together, get a base built, get some food, kind of find out what I'm doing, kind of, if you're doing the questing, I want to, or doing a story, I want to get these story elements done before all of a sudden, this island is just too strong. And I find like that worked pretty well.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to address because like that failure state is so core to so many different kinds of video game design. So many kinds. And handling it like the Forest did, at least through your retelling, I obviously haven't actually played the video game. Seems like a pretty good way to do it. I think I would still get frustrated with, well, I mean, it depends on difficulty tuning.
Yeah, it's not too terrible. In multiplayer, it's a lot different. In multiplayer, if you die, you just basically go back to spawn with nothing on you, which it's immersive breaking, but it still at least has an element of, because you lose all the stuff you had on you.
Yep.
Which a lot of that game is you're spending time acquiring items, and these items are in the caves. So if you die, either you have to get someone to give it to you, or you have to go pick them up, or maybe you had like some stuff you crafted on you. There's at least kind of a fail state. So there's kind of the two different things. But I really wish I would have tried it before starting this. But Phasmophobia looks fantastic horror-wise, and they have interesting fail states as well, since they are a short, digestible game. So they can kind of have that harsh fail of like you die. But since you're socially with friends, it's not as immersive. But it's harder to have that. You have to replay it immediately if you're just playing by yourself, or frustration of, okay, well, we took all your stuff away and now it's just kind of like you lost time, and replaying stuff can just be frustrating rather than scary.
Yeah, and I think that, again, going back to the point on frustration, that avoidance of the frustration in order to keep the player invested in the world that they're in, the save file that they're on, the amount of progress that they have through the story, is very difficult and very, very core to keeping somebody in the game. Like your failure state should not make your player just be like, oh yeah, it's a video game, I forgot.
Yeah, I agree. The more I think about it, the more I'm starting to agree that I think the roguelike, and maybe roguelite even, better way to go.
Completely disagree. Like 100% disagree. Because the roguelite, sure, the procedural generation of it can be very interesting, give you a different experience on every death. And if I recall correctly, Gloomwood does something like that. But the rest of the procedural generation of the game, the randomized progression, the randomized growing in strength, the randomized progression through areas can really, really take you out of it, to the point where you're then just going, well, just, come on, this stupid tile spawned again. I can never find the exit to it.
I think it has elements to use for it.
Yeah,
it's mostly just it's just the permadeath. But then the problem with permadeath and in the fact of roguelikes is that it immediately breaks immersion. When you start a new run, but in between runs there is no immersion. But
yeah,
I could see a horror game implementing that, where this is something I also want to talk about that we don't see much in horror games, which is character customization. You typically see silent protagonists, which create a vacuum of identity that gets filled by the player. You put yourself into it. Usually, if it's a first-person game, it's easy enough to do that you can't see yourself. Or if it's like the original Dead Space, there's no talking, so there's no personality, there's nothing. You're just you can't even see what the person looks like because they're wearing a suit. And we just happen to put ourselves in that. It's a bit more immersive that way. But then when the problem is, if you have to be able to have some sort of agency and care about the character you're controlling. And if we put into a roguelike, which is encouraged to have frequent deaths, you're going to go to a point where you don't really care about the character anymore, and there's not going to be any tension if they're going to die or not. It's kind of comes back to that, I died and now it's a time frustration because I have to do another run and I lost whatever time I had.
Yeah, which is what kind of killed my enjoyment of Hades as well. Because I did actually get invested in the characters in that game, but I had to grind for 4 hours to get the end of the story. That's not fun.
Yeah, elements of the game that I played, it's not really a horror game. State of Decay, at least State of Decay 2, I think it's one as well. You kind of the point of the game, it's a zombie game, and you're kind of building a base and building a civilization, and the characters that you recruit into your base are playable, and they all have different stats and different abilities, and they have permadeath. If you go out and they die, they die. But the atmosphere and the setting of the game is a bit more, not cartoony, but it's a bit more, lighter on side. The writing's a bit, a bit funny. It's not too, doesn't take itself too seriously. But I think that same kind of element where maybe, you have generated characters with abilities, you're assembling them, but when they die, which keeps that kind of roguelike element. So maybe it's a roguelike that, you're grabbing characters and you're not restarting the runs, and maybe it's not fully generated, but there are parts of the characters that are generated, and then when you're making them explore and go do things, if they do die, they stay dead.
Which does tap into the whole punishment aspect of horror, but at the same time, like, now you've made a completely different style of game. You've made a management game.
Kind of, but I mean, it can still be a horror, right? I mean, there's lots of
It's a spooky management game.
management's not a top genre, but
I love them.
yeah, I would say
Just for the record.
yeah, but
One of my favorites.
but it doesn't have to be like resource management. It could just be like Obscure did it fantastically, where you have 7 groups of people, and that's basically your 7 lives. They die. And you have characters that, given an immersive narrative, you really care about them. And only problem with that is that what I ended up doing for the harder parts is I picked my least favorite character and then would just run as far as I could with them. Like, just, all right, I'm gonna lose someone. Who can I lose?
It's gonna be you.
And then you start doing those and that'll of course break immersion too, right? Because you're like, which one of you is gonna get the chopping block? It's like, all right, you're the lamb. I'm sorry, but someone's gotta go. But it's also like, from a gameplay and experience point of view, it's a really unique experience to have to make the decision, because if it's done well, you're not going to want to pick anybody, and it's going to be a very difficult thing. But luckily for that game, there were some annoying characters, so I'm like, all right, well, you're just going to sacrifice. You're going to run this way. Everyone else is going to run the other way. Thank you.
Pseudo, have you played Until Dawn?
Yeah, I've beat it, and I've played Man of Medan as well.
Yeah, those are fantastic games. Deus recommend them to you as well if you haven't played them.
I have not.
You would particularly dig Until Dawn. It's done in the style of an 80s slasher film.
I like 80s slashers.
It's very very QTE heavy, but it's not really annoying levels of it. It's kind of just what's needed. But the story of it's really well done, and it's got like real world actors put into it as well. It's a good time.
Right on.
And I played it in a group of friends, which is interesting because they ended up putting that into their other game they made, which is Man of Medan, which is they added a friend mode, which is what my friends and I did is we all picked a character because there was a bunch of different characters in the game. And whenever the story was controlling one of those characters, that's the friend who would take the controller and play, which they actually implemented as a game mode for Man of Medan, and it's online, which is cool. So whenever those things come up, whoever chose that character is now, playing the game.
That's
when
cool.
Did that come out?
Actually, I think the sequel or the next game that studio made just came out yesterday or today.
Really?
Yeah. Until Dawn came out in 2015, and the Dark Picture series, starting with Man of Medan, came out in last year, August 30th of 2019.
Oh yeah, and Little Hope came out on October 29th.
I do like the added idea of having to work with others in horror, rely on others for things.
Well, and that can be a spooky thing all in and of itself, because you're not in control anymore.
Exactly. And if they do fail and die and they're gone, you've got one less person to help do tasks that need to be done.
Or
it's not very fun for the person who dies, but Dead by Daylight.
Dead by Daylight is a video game.
Yeah,
it's good. It's definitely more on the action side. The main problem with that is since it's player controlled enemies, the agency there is they're not always too scary. It's mostly just the jump scare effect of, oh my god, he's here. But when you actually watch him run around, he's running around in weird patterns and immediately kind of can be a bit silly. Oh yeah, and as well. Like, you start off with the team, and as your team starts getting decimated, it's gonna be harder.
It gets harder, but I don't think it gets scarier. You're you're gonna lose. That's the only fear.
Right.
In my mind, anyway.
Being the last person is a bit terrifying, but it's also like you kind of just accept what's going to happen at that point.
Yeah. I had some good memories when I play that game, and that's great. I'm not gonna say that you can't enjoy it and it's not a good game. It just comes across as a lot more of an action game to me.
Yeah, it's an action game with jump scares, which is quite common for horror, and it is still horror, but there's an element of it's the same thing with movies. Like a lot of Western horror just relies on tension build up jump scare, tension build up jump scare, tension build up jump scare, which is kind of the Western way to do it. But if you go towards like Japanese horror, it's just tension. The whole thing is just tension. And sometimes there's kind of jump scares, but most of the time it just lets you scare yourself. It doesn't go bah. It's like they'll pan the camera and then maybe you'll see that there's a thing in the corner that isn't supposed to be there. And if your brain catches that, alarms start going and you spook yourself. But it's all just tension.
Yeah. The Japanese filmmakers do an excellent job of tension building.
So a couple that aren't on here, Fatal Frame.
I guess that is technically a horror game.
Yeah, it's horror.
A lot of people consider it horror.
Clock Tower Origin, all those kind of games too.
Yeah. There was another one I had in my head.
It's like horror themed action.
Yeah. Again, it's got action to it. There was another one that was horror that I wanted to put on, but when we started talking about Fatal Frame, my entire brain went to Fatal Frame.
And don't get me wrong, I love Fatal Frame. I love that game. I love how strange it is. I love the weird mechanics. I love just the bizarre nature of that game. But I wouldn't say that it's a great horror game.
No, I'm not saying it's a great horror game, but it's a horror game worth... I guess these are people's favorites, but it is a lot of people's favorites.
Yeah, it's fair. Like, just because it's a favorite doesn't mean it's, inherently fantastic.
Yeah, or we got Outlast on here.
It's good to analyze, the good and the bad elements.
It was a fine game, but it wasn't super scary or anything. Got to look at the good and the bad to figure out what the good is. Absolutely. Fear Effect. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but the other one I wanted to talk about quickly was... It's an older game. I can't even remember what system it was. I think it was one of the older Nintendo systems. Could have been Dreamcast as well. It was... You have an insanity meter. And as long as you play the game fine... or like well, not fine, but well, it'll never be very scary. But as you make mistakes, you actually start warping the reality around you. And it starts at low levels with just little noises and eyes on the pictures following you around and stuff like that. And then as it gets farther and farther and farther up, it's like the walls start bleeding. Then when you start maxing it out, it'll do stuff like the game will freeze and lock up and then like jump to an error screen and start deleting your save. It won't actually do any of this, but it was just breaking the fourth wall to make you panic.
I remember Haunting Ground and I don't know if it was Eternal Darkness. I remember some other games had elements of that. There's an actually really recent game that had an insanity meter, which might be a good thing to put under the punishment, which was Green Hell, which is very similar to The Forest.
Yes,
but its insanity meter is just as you described. It's not so much a meter. It's just that the more and more you're exposed to certain stuff, the more and more kind of affected your character is by it. And then as it starts going higher and higher, you start hearing things that aren't there. You start hearing voices and monsters, and then eventually you start just seeing stuff that's not there. Like animals run out at you and then just disappear. Or a lot of that game is centered around avoiding these tribesmen that will just kill you. And then you just start seeing them. And the really weird thing is if it gets high enough, they start attacking you. They just, like, you don't know if they're real or not. And they'll just appear and they'll start attacking you and they'll start actually hurting you even though they weren't real. It's wild, and it's good. It's a good punishment. Like prevent it from happening. Certain things cause your insanity to go up, and then that that's not necessarily a game over if it's there, but it's going to make the game more difficult and a bit more freaky.
Can we consider Bloodborne a horror game?
No, it's an action game with horror elements.
Yeah, it's an action game with
It definitely scares me at times. Like, tension's up, high tension, worried because you don't want to die. Things are dangerous. Anything could kill you at any time.
That's most action games, though. To be fair,
that's good action games.
Yeah, that's not a lot of action games. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I thought it was a horror game until I played Soma. Yeah, Soma is not the kind of game that I like to play, but it is a fantastic game. And at the very least, watch it. Buy it and watch it, because it's got a great story. It asks great questions.
No. Minecraft is not a horror game, no matter how many articles people write.
Yeah. I could see like people contrasting like the dungeon exploring to having horror elements, because there's monsters down there. It's dark. You don't know what's going on, and you kind of just get attacked from nowhere. But the overall crux of it still comes down to it's just an element of part of some pieces, which is fine. Like, you don't always have to commit 100% for a horror game to be horror. Action games do that quite well, because action games are supposed to keep you on your toes.
Yep. Well, not necessarily always on your like
the sense of thrill. I mean, at least
Bloodborne has you like scared going through an archway. Well, what's in the corners and stuff once you properly understand the game. First few times you play it, you just walk through the archway and die.
You could say the same thing about Dark Souls, though, and I would not say that Dark Souls really has any horror elements to it whatsoever.
That's true.
It's and at Counter-Strike, I mean, same thing. You walk through a doorway and you don't know who's going to be camping in the corner with an op, ready to blast you.
I think it was more of a nice segue into talking more about keeping the difficulty to a point where people have to pay attention.
Player conditioning would be a good thing to talk about.
Yes.
So it's anything with what we were talking about with Bloodborne. You walk through an archway, and initially the player is in condition to know that they're going to get messed up. And it's a very vital tool to use in horror games, both in the sense of exploiting potential previous conditioning in players, which is things that a lot of games have, have safe rooms, or if you're they kind of have an idea of maybe there's like a menu select or something like that, or in between of levels that usually nothing ever happens, right? There's no game. All of a sudden you can throw game elements in there, or you can throw a spook, you can catch them off guard, as well as that's also how you introduce your horror elements, right? Well, maybe in your game the monster is in the bushes. In most games, bushes are just part of the landscape. They don't mean anything, but you have to introduce that mechanic. You have to condition them to know that there's something going on there.
Yeah.
So is there a game that does that has like a hub area, and then
there is.
At some tension point throws the monster in the hub?
Well, not at a tension point,
that's awesome.
but if you just wander around in the level select hub of Lakeview Cabin, you will get attacked and murdered by the monster in the sewers, which will start running around and murdering all your people that you used to select the level.
Yeah, and Lakeview Cabin 2 has another one like that, and it's fantastic. I'm trying to think if there's any other examples that there's games that'll basically they'll kind of Uno reversal the conditioning and the mechanics. And one thing I kind of like, they would never do this in Left 4 Dead because it's not really the point of Left 4 Dead. It's not really a horror game, but a good example would be kind of adding a fake safe room in a Left 4 Dead level would be a good idea, where you get so conditioned that once you hit that level, or once you hit that room, it's safe. Get everyone in there, close the door, and then have like a tank burst through the wall or something that would be, you'd really catch everyone off guard. And it's a big thing you kind of want to do for horror if you want to do jump scares. The whole point of a jump scare is, you're trying to catch someone off guard. You can kind of, a lot of the time, you give them the idea the tension's there, but you can also just have no tension, have them relaxed, and then go 0 to 100 on them. Yeah,
that's the best way to do it. I think my personal favorite way to do it, I think that's the best way to catch people with it, is the 0 to 100. And my personal favorite on that one is probably Jurassic Park. And all I have to do is name the movie and everyone knows the exact scene. Every time. I don't think I've ever watched that movie and not jumped at that part. Like, approaching it going, okay, you know it's coming. You've seen the movie a dozen times. It's about to jump out. Oh, fuck.
It gets you every time. Every single time.
Yeah, that's one to watch. And if you don't know, it's the raptor through the electrical panel scene. Every time. Everything
Doesn't matter how many times you've seen that movie. Does not matter.
Dino Crisis does that to you at one point. Which point? Go ahead, Pseudo.
The raptor scene that, you know, when they first come into the kitchen is like textbook tension building. You know, like it's like that seems well. One thing I maybe we can wrap up with when we kind of identify like all the elements and stuff like that. I'd love to discuss and contrast horror movies and horror games and see if there's any games that or any movies that translated to horror games. Because the only one I can really think of right now is Alien Isolation.
Hey, Covert Nico. Welcome. I guess I didn't play Pathologic 1. I played Pathologic 2. I never really interpreted it as horror. Definitely hopelessness and a depressing game, but it never had me scared.
That's one of the ones where it's a problem with horror too, is it can be incredibly subjective.
Yeah.
And Pathologic was one of those games where it depends on kind of the person playing, because some people can get very attached to the characters in the game, and especially if they kind of have like a fear of failure or, you know, of the permanent death, they really don't want anyone to die, and they take it, you know, a lot more critically when someone dies in the game than versus someone else who's, you know, kind of more centered around their character and not kind of too worried about what happens, you know, okay, well, so-and-so died, whatever, at least my character is still fine.
The plague houses get scared, and trying to do anything at night. Night darkness, we've gone over that as being one of everybody's most basal fears. People can get over it, but it's a basal fear instinct that we all start with. I mean, pretty much every kid is scared of the dark. I think my biggest difficulty around the fear in the game was the lack of difficulty in the combat. Like, I never felt myself was at risk in Pathologic 2. Not 1, but 2. Because whenever somebody jumped out to attack me, I could just knock them out.
Yeah, I think the game would have benefited from, I think we discussed this before too, would have benefited from not having that combat system, or have a very 100%. You know, defensive orientated one where maybe you're using like you stun them, or you drop traps, or you throw sand in their face or something, instead of just, because it doesn't break immersion. Like, the people show up and you just start left hook, right hook, left hook, right hook. I'm a doctor, but I'm going to beat up a gang of thugs who have been doing this a lot longer than I have.
Yep. And for the houses, sorry, just to touch on them, I saw them as safety a lot of the time, because the AI doesn't follow you in. So as soon as I jump in, I reset any of the AI chasing me, and I just have to deal with what's in the house. And if I don't like what's there, I jump right out and I'm good to go. I just keep going, or anything could hurt me. That was my difficulty in it.
Yeah, example back to the playing on player conditioning. So like Outlast, what they could have done, at least in the last chapter, is, you know, maybe have certain characters that will look in the proper locker, which would have been interesting, because you would have been so used to them not doing that, and you're like, as soon as you get in that locker, you're just like, whatever, he's gonna check the side one. But it would have been hilarious just to all of a sudden have them be incredibly accurate, because all of a sudden it's unpredictable, you don't know what's going on. That horror element would have been put right back in.
Would it though? Or would it have just been really frustrating?
It would have been scary at first, but I mean, that's kind of what horror unfortunately boils down to with punishment, right? It depends on, and it's one of the reasons why the horror genre is kind of a niche, because you have to have a high tolerance for frustration, because that's what the game is going to be. It's supposed to be hard, because if it was easy, there's nothing scary about things always being too easy.
Yeah.
So it's an unfortunate crux of it. It's kind of the point of frustrating. But the game has already had those elements of, you know, there's the bosses that chase you down and just instant kill you, and they're frustrating as hell. But it would have been nice, you know, at least have someone that just always searches that locker, and it would have just, you know, added a little bit more of like a flavor of horror near the end, rather than it just got so predictable.
Yeah, I think like a 25% chance or something for them to get the right locker would have made it a lot more interesting, because you're still able to make progress, but there's that threat of maybe you won't.
So our favorite games are known for being difficult, but they're not necessarily frustrating. And it's the fairness in the combat that comes out of it. To do that, like when you die, we're not super frustrated because we know we could have done something else to save ourselves. Can you incorporate that more into the horror genre where, like, maybe you can't kill the thing, but in a pinch, you can fight back in a very difficult way? Where he opens that locker and you're not guaranteed to just die, but all of a sudden you're in a situation where you've got to do something difficult and skill required. Does that reduce your frustration?
Yeah, I think it would, but I think there's also difficulty in working something like that in a way that maintains the tension of the big bad being better than you.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to bring up. For tension, a crux thing is the player should never be stronger than the enemy. Not at least. Actually, I'm going to say it should never be stronger.
I agree.
Typically for horror, they should never outpower the enemy. It should always be a brain over brawn. You should be able to outthink the enemy, and that's how usually you should defeat it, or you should just be able to escape it if it can be defeated. Which is the same thing you see in more well done horror films. Is they don't just sometimes near the end, you'll find that you feel cheaped out if they can kind of just, we could just kill it this whole time. Okay, well, damn. Whereas, if they have to come with some elaborate scheme to be able to, trap it or deal with it or escape from it, it's a lot more fulfilling. It's rewarding as an ending, as well as it keeps, that pressure building as you're not just going to be able to shoot it and it's going to die. You're going to have to, really put into some solid effort about this.
I agree with you. And when I was talking about bringing the skill element into it, I wasn't talking about killing it or fighting it on that sort of a level. I'm thinking more like, escaping it, being able to slip its hold where it's not easy, but it will be part of the game. It's going to just grab you sometimes. You're going to have to do this. It's something you're going to have to learn to do. You're not going to be able to do it every time. When you're hiding...
Like, if it is a mechanical skill check, somebody's going to be good enough at it that they will never be caught.
Yeah, and that's fine. They're not going to be that good, probably.
Because then it's just not scary anymore.
For that person. But it's like, on the realm of Dark Souls, the game's hard, and that's fine. It's still hard for 99% of people that play it, but there's definitely a community of people that make a mockery out of it. Those people are the people that love it and play it and play it and play it. They still started somewhere on it.
Yeah, the only problem with that is that that's more of an action game, right? You're building a skillful mechanic. You're building your digital skills to be able to play the game, whereas horror, you're not really supposed to be able to have that advantage, right? You're supposed to kind of be helpless. You can still get away, and I agree. Like, I think it'd be good if they open the locker and there's still sometimes a chance you can get away. I think that's good. But the problem is when it comes down to being too skill related, it kind of boils down into two groups of people who can never do it and the game becomes unplayable, and then the people who, of course, the two outliers, the people who are just too good at it, and now this mechanic doesn't really mean anything to them because now it's just it's slightly annoying, but I can get out of it. Typically, you kind of want to design around that where it's going to affect everyone. You can be as good as you want at the game. This part's still going to kind of have to mess you up, or you can be really bad at mechanical. You're maybe not as good at learning the skills, but you can still deal with it by paying attention to what's going on and maybe not have it be like an actual button press or a twitch reaction, but being able to learn what the game's trying to teach about use your brain to defeat the enemy's brawn.
Yeah,
and I think the Resident Evil series did a pretty good job of that with the mechanics like in RE2 where you have the consumables that allow you to get away from enemies. So you have a limited resource that allows you to get away, and otherwise you're not going to be able to do it anymore.
The knife being is what you're thinking of.
Yeah, the disposable knives and the grenades.
I love that grenades is a thing to get away from.
Oh yeah, they're so good.
I just love that that's even a thing. Yeah, I know it's point blank, but yeah, just use a grenade. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
Everything's fine. Yeah, I think there's room to bring a little bit. I'm not saying like skill being everything and being able to do it 100% of the time. I agree with you that it's too much, but I think there's room to reduce some of the frustration element by adding in a little bit more skill element to the gameplay.
Yeah, I'd say it depends on the game. I mean, if the rest of the game has had the skill elements and button pressions, then it's fine. But it can also be, like I said, it can unfortunately alienate those two things. But if that's what the game is in general, is you can design a horror game whereas you the player are going to get better at these skills to be able to do better against these enemies. That can be a very rewarding experience, and I'd still think that would build into horror. And you don't have, like, these games don't have to be playable by everybody.
Yeah.
So if someone unfortunately can't do that, then it's just unfortunately not a game for them. It's fine. I think it's at least in the case for Outlast, is that in Outlast there is no twitch skill rather than just running. So then it would kind of be foreign all of a sudden to implement all of a sudden you need to get good at a mechanic, and then chances are you'll get good at it pretty quick, and then now it just becomes a slightly annoying thing to do.
Yeah, but Outlast went from scary to just frustrating in like no time flat.
Which is a problem with a lot of horror games, and I don't think that there has been like an extremely good way of tackling that implemented.
Yeah, I haven't seen a great one.
There has been one.
I think I think that introduction of the skill is going to help a lot.
I think it would just be frustrating. I've played a lot of horror games that have that shit, and it's good at a time, but I'm unfortunately, like, once you get good at it, it's just it breaks immersion. As soon as you start seeing shit on the screen that telling you what to do, like if you want that real horror experience, unfortunately, it just kind of, once you get used to it, it breaks it. And I don't know if Outlast could be saved too much from any of that stuff, but what I would love to see is like a game that's kind of like The Thing or like The Exorcist, where you don't know where the thing is, you don't know what's happening. As the game goes on, you're discovering where it is, and it's building up this tension to this reveal of what the monster is, and then all of a sudden you're just in, oh shit, I need to get out of here mode. There's no mechanic that can there's no real skill to besides just trying to get out of there. But that's where I think that like the horror genre for games could really shine, is maybe moving more away from traditional game design of these are the buttons you push and these are the actions you have to use, more of just let's focus more on what we're putting in front of you, what we're trying to immerse you in, and how are we going to terrify you, and how are we going to make you want to leave this situation we put you in.
So maybe more in the vein of Amnesia and Amnesia Rebirth.
I was going to say maybe going more away from the vein of the mechanical skill and pushing heavier towards observational skill of the player.
I think I think that's right on a T. That kind of reminds me of other games that focus on observational skills, which is like Five Nights at Freddy's, which kind of came out of, and that's like the main mechanic. You're kind of just watching screens and clicking on stuff, but the skill is just observation, and that's something that is built into the human. It's part of our evolutionary trait, is we grew to be able to observe danger, and if we feel like we're not observing danger and we're missing stuff, that is actually terrifying.
Yep, and then it's got that same sort of skill effect to it, where you're no longer going, this is ridiculous, I couldn't have done anything here, why did I just die, I had no control, I have to do everything over again. It's now become that more, I shouldn't have missed that, I don't know why I didn't see this, and the onus is now back on the player, which helps really reduce the frustration level when you understand where you went wrong and know how you can improve and change and adapt to actually get better at what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Amnesia kind of maybe not nails, but does fairly well. Especially minor spoilers for the first Amnesia, but it's been like 5 years. Come on, go play the game. The water section in the first game is terrifying. Oh my god, it's so scary. And the thing that saves you from the danger is being able to manipulate the world around you at speed. Like all you can do is manipulate things in that game. There's no combat, but just having the ability to manipulate the world, move boxes, jump on things, open doors, shut doors. Your ability to interact with the world is what saves you in those sections. And I think that that's probably one of the better ways to deal with a quasi-mechanical check.
I think mental skill, like problem solving, observation. I think there's most of anything that you can use for mental skills is probably what we should do for horror, because horror is basically all, horror, like it's mental, like it's in your mind, right? A lot of stuff isn't.
Let's agree, puzzle elements are definitely a core part of horror games. There's
For sure.
I don't usually find the puzzle elements scary at all. That's not where the horror in the game is ever coming from, as far as I've ever remembered. But there's definitely always there, and I like them, and I like puzzles. But pushing the reliance on that observational skill for the survival to create the horror there, I like that idea.
Yeah, well, a bunch of games do that through their puzzles. Like that's what Lakeview Cabin does. You have to be very observant to get through it. They just don't. That's what kind of boils down to in punishment as well. Is they're just not as. Well, some levels are fairly punishing. They'll have like a hidden timer where you need to be observant very fast to get through it. But most of the time, like that game isn't trying to be super terrifying. But yeah, I think playing on all those things where like Amnesia, you have to be observant because you have to figure out. It wasn't so much puzzle solving, but it's what is in this room and what can I use? How do I get out of this room? So it's kind of playing on, you got to observe what's in the room and then use your problem solving skills to what you found in this room. How can I now utilize this to get myself out of here? And I my first experience playing Amnesia, when the first monster came at me, I grabbed a box and threw it at him, and he just kept walking, and it was like, oh shit, oh no,
Yeah, you can't stop him. He's coming.
Stacked a bunch of boxes on the wall, just barges in like, okay, stop.
Looking at it, that first Lakeview Cabin also had an insanity meter in the second game. Hidden insanity meter. Longer you're in the house. Soundtrack starts getting louder, the house starts tilting side to side, it goes red, you hear more screaming. When you get out of the house.
Yeah, it's the unpredictableness. It's making it so you can't get used to what's going on. You can't get used to the system. Because even if, the settings are initially scary, I mean, after a couple of minutes, you get used to it. But if you keep changing shit up, make shit louder, maybe make it quieter, maybe just change the tone, change the room, change the layout, change who's in it. And all of a sudden, if you can't get used to anything and you're always uncomfortable, then you're probably going to be pretty terrified.
I think that boils down to unexpected. The unexpected. Yeah. Something's different, so the initial mental reaction is, why is this different? And if you don't know, that's going to create tension.
I think just unpredictable elements. As long as it's unpredictable, it doesn't always have to be random. Because
unpredictable is a much better word.
Yeah, because the word random always scares me because
random it has
true random. Yeah. I'm just gonna check what else. I have notes for tension. We briefly talked about audio design, but audio cues and visual cues are really important for horror games as well, like footsteps.
Yeah.
Markers. The thing was here. Or the footsteps. The thing is coming.
Yeah. What are your favorites? I guess Alien Isolation, I think, used audio really well, if I remember. I haven't played it, but I've read about it.
You have the radar. You have the radar that goes beep, beep. You can hear the thing moving around. Trying to think of Obscure had that as well. You can hear the stuff coming. You can see where it was.
Outlast.
Yeah, Silent Hill used audio very, very well.
I didn't play a lot of Silent Hill. I'd like to hear more, and I do want to talk about Silent Hill, and we're getting close to the end time. So let's talk about Silent Hill and their use of limited vision ranges.
And the reason for their use of limited vision ranges.
Yeah, man, it was so spooky walking. Who here playing Silent Hill for the first time was walking around in the fog going, oh my god, what's in front of me? I'm so terrified. Is that most people's experience with Silent Hill 1? ES1 era? Man, that game was spooky. Well, before we get too much into all of the fun, interesting horror elements, let's quickly talk about the genius, award-winning game design decisions that they made. Because the original tech demo for Silent Hill actually didn't have fog. However, it also ran at like 2 frames per second because of the draw distance for the town. They were like, well, that's not playable. And remember, PS1 still was mostly 60 frames. It was PS2 where everything dropped down to 30 and everyone went, it still looks good. Because that's what the PS2 could do with the graphics they wanted to put out. The PS1, however, not so much at that time. It was fairly early game, if I remember right. Not too long after Resident Evil.
I believe it came out around the same time as RE2, if I recall.
Remember that Silent Hill buildings were modeled off of the buildings in Kindergarten Cop. Well, that's cool. I didn't know that. But they needed a way to address their frame rate issues. So what they decided to do is limit the draw distance. And just not draw and render all that stuff in the distance so they can save resources. This was the initial decision, which set the rest of the game design team sitting down going, well, how do we limit the vision? They decided to use fog. Seems like a natural choice. I strongly agree with their decision. It's totally explainable as to why it's there. Fog's a natural thing people understand. Fog in a town is not something a lot of people are going to question. You might start questioning it after a few days and when you find out it's been there for a while, but it's still an understandable thing that fog happens and limits your vision. It doesn't pull you out of the game at all.
Well, and the combination of it being a natural phenomena, something that is well known, and then throwing a little bit of like, hey, wait a minute, that's not quite right into it when you start finding out that fog is just ever present since it showed up. That's creepy. That's spooky.
Yeah, super well done.
It's really interesting because like it's one of the games where at least originally there isn't really lighting. Or there is lighting, but if there isn't an absence of lighting, when most games are like it's super dark, they restrict vision a separate way, which, as you said, is by using the fog. Which is interesting because it's not always, at least for spooky, you don't always have to restrict it from just lighting. You can put other elements in the way, but it's just the overall restricted vision, not knowing what's out there, is what's terrifying to just animals in general.
Yeah, obfuscating the vision. That also goes back to Alien versus Predator and Alien Isolation, where you might not have fog or darkness blocking your vision, even if it's lit. You could have walls blocking your vision because it's a wall to you, but it's not necessarily a wall to whatever it is you're running from. Be anything on the other side of that wall. It could come through that wall. That'll keep you alert. A lot of PS2 games use fog because of limitations, but it used well mechanically.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the games on our list here do a good job at restricting the player's viewpoint into the world in a variety of ways, really. But it is definitely something that can be overdone to the point where you just feel like, well, I just can't interact with this thing.
Yeah,
I'm not getting enough information.
Yeah, that's a good point. You don't want to overdo it. You want to allow them to play the game, but limit them to the point of curiosity. That should be where you draw the line. Make them curious about what's going on. It's also a designer's first mistake, early learning.
Yeah. Hiding a little too much from the player.
Yeah. Yes, that is one that I'm sure we've all done.
So I'd love to recap what we went over, and then if there's a bit of time, I'd love to talk about horror movies and quickly contrast those to horror games, because I feel like there's a whole untapped source material there. There really isn't. They don't translate super well all the time, but I still think there's a lot of stuff that can translate that hasn't been done yet. And maybe with technology improving, we'll be able to get there pretty soon.
I'm okay with this. It also lets us talk about old horror movies for a bit for Halloween. I love old horror movies.
So the three key tenets of horror, as we sort of put out, well, we pseudo put out at the beginning of the show here, are punishment, tension, and immersion. And we've got a couple of different things that we have broken down as pieces of those different categories. You know, punishment being your death. Maybe the game gets more difficult.
Things change.
Implementing some sort of permanent consequence.
Yeah, the insanity meter is one we all really liked for a consequence, and that's why we put it in there. More things happen that shouldn't be happening, and maybe even aren't happening. And then it's up to the player to have to distinguish, is that actually happening or not?
It's a great way to build tension, which is the other element. And tension is just that uneasiness. You know, basically the player cannot relax, or if they can relax, it's for short bursts. I think horror games should still, you know, have breathing rooms. You know, you should have a time to, if it's non-relenting, then that's something that a player can also get used to. You need to be able to, you know, chop up a bit of comic relief, or, you know, have a few moments where, you know, the player can relax a little bit. It can even be used to, you know, lower their guard, but tension is usually made by, you know, lighting, really dipping into the uncanny valley, which is basically use things that are realistic, but tweak them slightly so that our brains are uncomfortable with it. And these can be such things as when you're talking to like another human in the game, have them not blink is a perfect way to all of a sudden your brain subconsciously starts noticing that something wrong. You may not immediately notice it yourself that they're not blinking. And another thing is the maintaining of eye contact. If they're moving especially, that immediately trigger. Audio triggers are really good for tension, as well as just having anything that's just unpredictable. Anything that, as long as you can't get used to it, can't get comfortable, you'll be tense.
Phobias. Phobias is one we touched on. Don't forget about the primary ones.
Screw the bugs in RE7.
There's some big phobias that encompass massive groups of people that will create a lot more tension if you touch their phobias. A little bit of game design.
And then immersion, which is very, very important. And one of the reasons why horror games are so difficult to do is that immersion is different from player to player. It takes different things to immerse other players. Some players maybe not be able to immerse at all in a video game. They can always just see it as it is, which is just a video game, as just interacting with pixels on a screen. But ways to help with that is, of course, you know, the lighting. If it's realistic looking or has, you know, realistic looking predictable effects that, you know, the less the player will think I'm playing a game, or I'm looking at an actual dark hallway, they will be immersed. They will be a bit more tense. You know, they will be believing what's there. Another thing for immersion, of course, is, you know, the music and audio design. If you're walking around to be hearing footsteps, the player should. Crux for immersion is kind of the opposite of the tension, where you kind of want to put as much in there as the player would expect, but not have it be, you know, too uncanny. So the things that, you know, aren't going to detract from the experience, aren't going to make them think it's too much of a game. Another thing that I'm not sure if we put down yet, which was the players themselves. Typically for horror games, you'll find that they don't have an identity, or they have an identity that the player can set. You'll find that allows for a lot of immersion, because when there's a vacuum of identity, the player will fill it themselves. They'll feel like they have a personal stake, because they feel like it's them that they're trying to keep alive in the situation. And a really important thing for both for tension and immersion is the AI. Yep. It's very difficult to do. If a great AI will keep you on your toes, will keep you freaking out, you don't know what it's going to do next, which will of course build tension. A bad AI will be predictable, and you'll remember that, okay, I'm playing a video game. I can kind of see what the game programmers are kind of do. It becomes predictable. Okay, I'm no longer, you know, scared of this thing.
As soon as you start gaming the game, horror's out the window. Done.
Yeah, when you figure out how to cheese the big bad in the horror game, it's not scary anymore.
Yeah. No, you know when you're safe. You know when you might be at risk. It just becomes a risk management game at that point.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately really good at cheesing games. It's just, for some reason, what I tend to do, because I find it kind of fun, or like it's like if I don't accidentally break something, I'm always like, well, you know, how can I break it? And one of the last horror games I did that too was Hello Neighbor, and finding out how to get them stuck was hilarious. And the best part about it was that the audio cues didn't stop. So I'd get them stuck and then walk away, go about my own thing, but the audio was still just terrifying. And I'm like, after a while, it just becomes silly because I'm just like, the point of the game is you're supposed to sneak into the house and get certain objects that are clues. And of course, he catches you all the time. But if you get him stuck, it just becomes a hide and seek game of like, okay, well, where is this stuff? Like, where is it? I spy, and it's kind of actually difficult to find. So I was still engaged to beat it because I wanted to know what was going on. But just casually walking through a house with his horror music playing got super silly over a period of time.
Yeah, I was going to say, what? You know how to break games? Huh. It's almost like you understand the back end of them or something.
I can't help myself. I'm like, every time I play a game, I'm like, what if I jump on this corner? Am I going to launch? And then like half the time, it's like, yep, physics launch.
And the other half of the time, you fall through the world.
Well, you got to play more Risk of Rain too. You don't need to do anything to physics launch except hit spacebar.
Or, run forward into an incline and just...
Yes, I love it when I don't have to jump. That's always good. But yeah, you wanted to talk a bit about movies.
Yeah, horror games and movies. I'll start off a bit and then we can start naming some classics. But they're similar but very different in a lot of ways. And the main difference between them, and I see, is that horror movies, the viewers, you are just a viewer. You're kind of along for the ride. You have no agency in what's going on. You don't have a say what's going on. You're just there, which is a very powerful tool because you have no control. And that's why horror movies are very effective at, freaking you out because you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't have any control over it. You have no say. You're just, okay, I'm just along for the ride. Games, on the other hand, you have, for the most part, have kind of full control of your character. And that's why it can be kind of very hard to, create that immersion because, okay, well, now you can control the character, but you can't force the character to walk that, predetermined line. So if it's a horror, like it's in a horror scene in a movie, you want them to walk down a hallway all nice and slow and spooky and then peek into a door and have something jump. If you get a player to do that, chances are they're going to kind of run around, jump, especially if they have to jump. You're going to keep spamming jump, which immediately, it's not going to be the same thing. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just that's the main difference between the two that I've found. But then the horror movies, some of the classic ones, like starting from, Night of the Living Dead, all the way to more modern ones like I think Cabin in the Woods is a really one to talk about because it kind of plays on and shows all the other horror movies that are around. But I'll let the other guys talk about more of the classical horror and kind of what they mean, and maybe we can figure some ways of transitioning some of those elements into games.
Well, I mean, first of all, Cabin in the Woods was amazing.
Yeah.
Just fantastic film.
I love that movie thoroughly. But if you want to talk truly classic horror, we're going to have to jump forward quickly, so let's just touch on the actual origins of horror. Horror started out as kids programming and comedy mostly. That's where old gore came from. It was considered a joke. The first film to change horror from a comedy approach, where a lot of kids would watch it, to this is not acceptable for young audiences, was Night of the Living Dead. That show changed it on such a drastic level in such a rapid progress to the point where it was actually shown in a lot of schools in classrooms to kids. That's where most people saw it the first time at that time. They weren't ready for that. First horror with a lot of nudity and stuff.
Which of course scared the pants off them.
Yeah.
Understandably.
And to kind of analyze it, the reason that was so different is it kind of had the same elements that we talked about in horror games where, it's immersive because it takes place in the same old towns that most of these people live in. Most places have graveyards. And the enemies are just people, and they're people that you know. And all of a sudden, they're just unrelenting. They're stronger than you. They're coming after you. And it's just kind of, you don't know what's new. You're tense. You don't know what's going on. You're uncomfortable. It's kind of violent, and the punishment of these things are going to kill you. So you have agency. You have like, I don't want to die, and then it just paces incredibly well for one of the original horror movies.
Yes, which is amazing because none of his other movies do.
The zombie genre gets wild. I absolutely love zombie movies, but they are definitely their own thing, especially the unofficial remakes of some of the zombie movies, which are just hilarious.
While we're on the topic of zombie movies, if you haven't seen Zombies of Mass Destruction. That's probably the best one made in a long time. Strongly recommend it. It was.
I have heard of it. I have not seen that, Ruben.
I have seen Zombie Strippers. I love that movie. I'm a horrible person though.
I think like one of the Dawn of the Dead remakes was fairly well done. Definitely still has the campiness bit of issues into it, but especially I think 28 Days Later as well, which isn't too much zombies, but the same kind of just infection spreading. All of a sudden, these things are just incredibly violent one after you, and they start transitioning into the fast zombies as they are. And turns out, taking something that's slow and scary and making it fast makes it very scary.
I didn't really like. I didn't like 28 Days Later.
Really? You didn't like 28 Days? I loved 28 Days.
I much preferred 28 Weeks Later.
Huh. I think I can understand and respectfully disagree.
But I did love the remake of Dawn of the Dead. That was fantastically done. Fantastically done.
Yeah, that was really well done.
Fast zombies, man. Too spooky. I think quickly touch on some other horror movies that are fantastic. Like I think The Thing and The Exorcist.
Yep.
Are incredibly well done, and it's those things where it's the pacing. They keep you on your toes. It's not always just going to be jump scares. It's just you're just so uneasy because you're just so uncomfortable through all of it. You're tense. You don't know what's happening with The Thing. You don't know who this thing is. You don't know what it is. You don't know where it is. And it keeps building up to these moments of, all right, well, we know we're going to find out in like a couple seconds, but is it going to happen now? Is it going to happen in 5 seconds? Like, what the hell? And then The Exorcist, it's just creepy. And just the premise of it. And it kind of sticks with you after, too, because there's a bit of, they try to throw in a bit of that realism of, this could actually happen. I mean, if you think about it too critically, you'll be like, oh, no, but like for a sense there, you're like, you know what? Like, it's not like, it's a relatable setting,
Yes.
We're somewhere on Earth. Kind of a thing. It's somewhere that I could be, that a similar situation could happen to me, so you can get immersed in that sense.
Also,
but there is enough of the perversion of the normal that sort of makes it just that extra step away from normality. Often you'll see it in films represented as like just everything is dirtier than you would expect. Like you see the homes that people are living in are very grungy, like they've never actually cleaned them. Or there's, these churches, but it doesn't have any windows and all the benches are too far apart. And it's just like these things that just don't quite add up that make them very, very creepy.
Rob Zombie took dirty to its own genre, basically, and has basically coined hillbilly horror with it. And that's basically all he does, is everything is dirty and grimy and redneck and outback and far enough out into the boonies that think that these people could actually exist out there in this fucked up way. The new Texas Chainsaw did it very well too. And using the intro of, this is real and happened, screwed up some people. That screwed some people up. Wrong Turn is a good movie, though not zombie. Radioactive Rednecks. Why is Rednecks not allowed?
I forgot what I was going to say now. You were talking about hillbilly horror. And then, one point you said everything was dirtier and stuff. That was one thing I noticed from 28 Days Later versus 28 Weeks Later, is that 28 Days Later is dirty and gritty. They're going from place to place. The entire thing is kind of that apocalyptic landscape, whereas 28 Weeks Later is kind of just that before everything got that way, so everything is, pristine and clean, but then the horror happens, and it's not that one's better than one's worse, it's just there's separate ways to do it, as long as that dirtiness comes into play, and you can tell when things start being cared for, and when things just aren't as they should be, is the main thing.
Cool.
Another thing I want to quickly touch on for The Exorcist, that people tend to forget about, is the language that was used in it was not that common in a lot of movies back then. It is quite vulgar. By today's standards, it's like, yeah, okay, we've got to desensitize to this. But back then, that was against social norms, and that's something else that horror has done very well, is exposed and kind of repulsed a lot of social norms. and that's another way that you can make people uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. That I think that's been pushed a little too much in modern horror. It's turned into this almost try-hard fest within the horror world. I liked the older ones. They took themselves less seriously, although they admittedly weren't as scary. They were just entertaining.
No, and then is it?
Go ahead.
And unfortunately, like profanity and vulgar things. Like I won't quote what the like in the movie The Exorcist. What I think her name's Tabitha. No, that's the Ring. I can't remember whatever. I think Pazuzu's the demon's name, but whatever that little girl's saying, it's incredibly vulgar, and at least for its time, it caught everyone off guard because you don't expect those things, and even though they're not really terrifying, that element of this isn't this is new, and this isn't right can help enhance that feeling of uncomfortableness, that feeling of tension, which I think could be done in video games. Unfortunately, video games were a bit too late by the time the technology was there. That you can't really do the same thing anymore. Profanity and vulgar statements are just kind of like not really accepted, but everyone's more or less used to them or have heard them by now.
Well, also every time video games try to do anything pushing the envelope like that, the censors stamp it immediately, going, "You can't do that. This is for kids."
Yeah, same thing happens with movies when they try to avoid that R rating.
Depends who made it. But yeah, the market's still there. I mean, there are still quite vulgar horror games. I mean, Lakeview Cabin has no dialogue, but it's got some pretty vulgar parts that'll make you uncomfortable. Which I don't know if I agree with the way they did it, but it's there to make you uncomfortable, and it works. It's like, this isn't right. I shouldn't be doing this, but I have to because this is what I need to do to beat the game. Yep.
Yeah, I think the main crux between movies and horror is the ability to actually control and have that believable threat. But the problem, the drawback is then just the narrative. It's harder to force the player to do something without explicitly forcing them and frustrating them, but also preventing them from not taking the game seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I'm stoked for VR.
Yeah,
I think VR is really going to bridge that gap between a horror movie and horror game.
It definitely makes you feel more in it. Yeah. And
even
Go ahead.
Yeah, so even just from an observation standpoint, like even if the game is you sitting in a chair, just instead of moving the right stick and left stick to move the camera on, just tilting your head is just instantly 100% more immersive. And also it is literally you. That's the beauty of VR. The character is you. So it's there's nothing you can really do too much about it. You are full control. If someone's coming at you, it's coming at you. But one quick thing is I'm not sure if Chad has any ideas or if you guys have any ideas. There's been some horror games that have been translated, or horror movies have been translated to games, but I can only think of one decent one, which is Alien Isolation. I think kind of tributed the original Alien movie very well. But other than that, I don't think there's too many that have done it too well.
Movies to game? Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No.
I think
you're asking for good movie licensed games. Like, even if we exclude horror, the list is pretty short.
Very, very short list.
Yeah, well, I'm saying it doesn't exist, which means that there's a potential still there.
Absolutely.
It doesn't always have to be fully licensed. But Alien Isolation was fully licensed, but I'm still saying there's a lot of elements there, and it's kind of just an interesting tidbit. That's something that hasn't really been done or hasn't been done well yet.
I like that they used Alien as the horror game inspiration, because a lot of people don't even think of Alien as horror anymore. Everyone knows Aliens, and it's become an action movie. But Alien, fucking horror. That was creepy and tense and spooky the whole time. That was a great movie. First Blair Witch was good, but movie to game is usually very bad, but it's the same vice versa. Yeah.
Translating mediums, at least directly, is pretty hard to do, or near almost impossible. But it's still nice to note, the certain ones that do it well. Like the Warriors game for PS2, I think is one of the best game adaptations of a movie. It is. I don't know if you guys have never played it. It is phenomenally well done. I was just thinking, at least for horror, it seems even more niche, because I guess it's even harder to do, of course, because of the differences in horror movies are usually you're along for the ride, where horror games you can control it. But it's nice that at least for Alien they were able to pull it off because okay, well you can control it, but you know we're going to force you around because if you're not doing what we want you to do, we're going to sick this alien on you. And he's going to come kill you.
Yep. Yeah. Holy. Oh no. Reset site. Okay, I gotta type this out again. I've got some specific games. I'm not doing random games this time. I looked through the list. I was like, these ones will fit.
All right. Well, while